You guys can have a seat. Let's say thanks to our friends for leading us in worship this morning. Glad to have you all here, despite many texts, tweets, emails, Facebooks. I'm sure it's easy to feel like, hey, what's going on here? So I totally understand that. And if you're with us for the first time today, like Travis said, today you're going to get a peek into conversation about this church. So for you may walk in and go, I don't understand what's happening here, and I also understand that. But I think that God is not only speaking to those who call this place home, but that you'll find God speaking to you in the midst of this. So just know that I know you might feel a little bit on the outside looking into today, and that's okay. So here's where we're going to go today. Here's how I want to sort of unpack this conversation. First, I want to talk about why we're having this conversation in the first place. I want to talk about where we've been in this conversation around where God's been leading this church. Then I want to dive into the Bible. I want to look at what God has been saying to us. I want to look at a story in Genesis 11 and 12. After that, I want to walk through just a little personal reaction to that, how God's been personally speaking to me in this process. And then we'll get to the part of what does this mean for our church? What does this mean going forward? And next steps and things like that. So does that sound good? We all on board with that? All right, so what brings us to this place? Why are we talking about the future of this church and where we're going next? And the reality is that we've been wrestling with the question of, God, what's next? For most of the last year. That we know that over the last 3 years that our growth and our impact has been plateauing, and that we are not a financially sustainable church. And so we put all these things together and we start to say, God, we know that the future of our church probably isn't in this place in this way. And so you must be saying something else to us in that process. So all we've done is to say, let's lean into that question. Let's dialogue with God on that and to say, God, what is it that you are calling us to? What does that mean for us, and where are you calling into the future? So in that, we've explored lots of options, actually. We've looked at a number of different things. We've talked about planting a new church in Allendale with this body, and we've driven around, we've prayed, and we've not seen God open those doors. More recently, since January, we've had some conversations with our sister campus in Harbor Life in Granville to say, what would it look like for a strategic merger between the two campuses? And we had some really great conversations with them, and ultimately our team didn't feel at peace with continuing those conversations. So we knew that that was a different option there. And we've also even considered conversations that Harbor Churches has been having with a church in Jamestown about merging and adopting them, but that church has recently come and said, we're no longer interested in adoption. I've even been longing for just worship at Travis and Jen's apartment, and that may be an option. We certainly don't have to shovel the driveway, so, we've looked at a lot of different things. Some of those things you may not even know, but over the last year, we've been intentionally looking at options and seeking things. And what we've come to understand through all of that is that, boy, this is really confusing, God. What is it that you want to say to us? And the one thing that we did sort of come out of that conversation understanding is that God is asking us to be sent. I'm not exactly sure how that had all looked and what does that mean, but God, we hear you clearly saying, go, be sent. So we wanted to lean into that thing. Out of all of that, we know that, and God, what if we lean into that? What would you do if we leaned into that? And so I want to talk a little bit about what it means to be sent. I want to talk a little bit about that from the scripture in Genesis 11. So if you have a Bible, you can turn to that or swipe to that, or we'll have some on the screen here. And I just want to look at three things as we look at the story of Abram. You may know him as Abraham, but at this point in his life, his name was Abram, and how God had called him and really sent him, and what that means for us as a church. So we're going to look at Genesis 11. I got to read behind me because the screen over there is way too small. So I still love you. It's okay. So here, I just want to read through this story from Genesis 11, and we'll be starting in verse 27. This is the account of Terah's family line. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran became the father of Lot. While his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans, so the land of his birth. This is a place where his family grew up, this place called Ur, which I think is a great place to grow up. This sounds awesome. Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, and the father of both Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was childless because she was not able to conceive. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Terah lived 205 years, which is a really long time to live, and then he died in Haran. The Lord then had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran, and he took his wife, Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Let's just go back to that last slide, the first one in that, because we really have two parts, and we're going to start with this first part here, because sometimes we think like genealogies and like who's the son of who and who's married to who is really boring, but there's story there. This is the story of a family. Many people say that in the next slide, when God calls Abram and he says, go to Canaan, that this was actually a call to the entire family. That we look at what's happening in this first part, when they set out from Ur and go to Canaan, that God actually called the entire family group, right? Not just Abram and his wife and his nephew Lot, but this was a clan that God had called. And so as we unpack this, as we look at this, we know that the clan didn't go, that they actually stopped short, that God had called them to Canaan, and they stopped in Haran. And they settled there. They stopped short. And so the first thing that we see when we hear God call, the first thing that we notice is that it's almost always out of a comfort. It's always out of some place that feels comfortable, right? And so one of the things to know about the place Haran and the place Ur is that they're very similar. You look back and you understand these two civilizations, these two cities. Haran is very similar to Ur, a place that would have been very familiar, very comfortable. It was the same kind of merchant culture existed in Haran. The same gods were worshipped there. It was the same type of community. So you start to unpack the story of this family, of God's call to them, and they take a little detour and they stop short of going to Canaan. God calls us over here, but yet here's something that feels really good, that feels really familiar, that feels like, I'd rather stay in that place. And so they settled in Haran. The place is also interesting because it's named the same name as his deceased son. So the story tells us that he has 3 sons, and that while he was still alive, his son Haran died. So it's almost as if the writer of this story is indicating sort of an emotional journey, not just a physical journey. It's almost as if that this family didn't want to leave the funeral, right? That my son died, and I don't want to move on, and we want to stay in this emotional place that feels comfortable. So I think of this place, Haran, and I think of it like a warm, cozy blanket, right? This place that we all know when things feel comfortable, God, and God is calling us somewhere else, we have this temptation to be drawn into what's comfortable. The comfort of not moving on, the comfort of something that's familiar, the gravity towards what feels really, really good. So we know that when God calls, he calls us to be sent out of something that's comfortable. He asks Abram and his family to leave their homeland, to leave their family, to leave all of these things that really shape their identity and feels best. So that's one thing. The other thing that we learn about this story is that when God calls, he calls us through pain to a promise. Through pain to a promise. That God gives this promise, and then there's this other journey. So let's look at verse 2 and 3 here, right? I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. Whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. This is an incredible promise to a single family. All the people on the planet Earth will be blessed through your family. That's a big deal. That's a huge promise. But in order to get to that promise, in order to get to verse 2 and 3, you have to go through verse 1, right? The Lord had said to Abram, go from your country, from your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. Leave your family. To get to this promise, you have to go through something that'll be really hard, that'll be painful. And I get that. Our gospel of Jesus Christ gets that. We are people of death and resurrection. We are people who believe in death and resurrection and that there is hope and that there is promise. We follow a risen Savior. We believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ. But we would all like for that resurrection to happen without the death, probably. We would all like the promise without the pain. We would all like to go to Easter without going through Good Friday. And I get that. I understand that. But what this story shows me is that when God calls, he calls us to a promise through pain. So that brings me to the third point of what I see in this story is that when he calls, he also asks for everything. That in this story of Abraham and his family, that when God calls, he asks for everything. And I think that's why it's painful. I think that's why when we respond to the promise that we go through pain is because God asks for every part and not just a portion. He called this whole clan, but some of them didn't go. Some of them didn't go to Canaan. They settled in this spot in Haran, and they stopped short, and they didn't make it. So we open into verse 12, and we see God saying, Abram, you have to go. You have to leave these people behind because I've asked for everything. And though they may not be willing, I need you to be willing to give everything to this. Interestingly enough, if you read through Genesis and you go to Genesis 28 and 29, you see the story of Abraham who ended up in the promised land of Canaan. And then he has a son, Isaac. And he has a grandson, Jacob. And later in Genesis, there's stories of Abraham bringing his son back to Haran and then coming back to Canaan. And then there's stories of Abraham bringing his grandson to Haran. And I think he does it for a reason. I think he does it because he wants the future generations of his family to see what happens when we stop short, when we stop. That he's bringing them back to this place and he's saying, let me tell you about your grandfather. Let me tell you about the part of us who didn't come to the promised land. And he wanted his generations behind him to almost hear this as a warning, to say, when God calls, he's going to ask for everything. And don't stop short. And I reflect on that because we have, as human beings, have this sort of natural desire to bargain with the God of the universe, right? We have this, as if we have some chips to play in this conversation, to say like, okay, God, that sounds great, but these parts over here are going to be mine, and you can have like the rest. And God says, I actually would like your entire life. And we say, okay, but I'd like to keep this one thing, maybe, right? And God says, I would like your entire life. Okay, but what about my friends and my family? I'd like to keep, no, I would like your entire life. Okay, but I get to make the choice, right? We do this. We bargain and barter with God, and for some reason we believe that it works. But when God calls, he asks for everything. Dietrich Bonhoeffer had this quote when talking about this subject, and he says, one cannot give him only a small compartment in our spiritual life, but must give him everything or give him nothing. The religion of Christ is not a tidbit after one's bread. On the contrary, it is the bread or it is nothing. People should at least understand and concede this if they call themselves Christians. And so that's the challenge in front of us. That's the challenge of the place that we've walked. We know that God is calling to send us. And we know that when he sends, that we often want to stop short. And we often don't want to be called out of some place that is comfortable. We know that God promises something amazing, but to get to that is pain. And we know that when God calls, he asks for everything. And so a number of weeks ago, as we were having this conversation, Mary brought this verse from Luke 11, from Jesus in Luke 11, as we were having this conversation. And Jesus says this, in the same way those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. And that reflects not just on this call to Abraham, but this call Jesus asks for all of us. So thanks a lot for that, Mary. Feels really great to know that Be reminded of this fact that we often want to move away from, but that Jesus himself says to do this means everything. To follow me is not just a portion of who you are. And so as we sort of walked into that, I decided to go first on that. I decided to say, okay, God, if this is what you're saying, what are you saying to me in this personally? Let's leave the church part out of it for a moment and just say, God, how are you speaking to me in this process? And so on the personal side of that, I realized that there were many things that I was willing to sacrifice and give to God in this process. A lot. I was willing to say, God, I totally trust you with this whole entire part of the thing. And that part might feel really big, but God, this is kind of a future that we're talking about, and this really matters to me, so God, I'm going to hang on to some of this. I don't care if it's in this room, but I don't care if it's this name. I don't know what I care about, God, but some of this I'm willing to give up to you, but there was a bunch that I wasn't. So I started to do that. I started to just process through that. God, what if I did? What if I gave up even the idea of seeing any of my friends again? God, what if I gave up on the idea that there is a really clean, slick answer to this problem that we've been addressing? God, what if I gave up my own hopes and dreams and roles in this whole entire process? God, what are you saying to me? What are you saying to me? So when I really started to let that go, I started to hear from God personally. And we started to talk about this in my family. And God showed me a personal response that he was inviting me into something. And he said he was inviting me into the beginning of a new church in my community in Jamestown. And so I've begun to process through that and ask God, so how does that mean? And he's shown me that there's a vision he has for a group of people, just like me, just like you, that out in my community live in some really nice houses and have a lot of junk behind the doors. And he's saying, people need help finding their way back to me, and I want you to go be a part of that. So that's been my journey. That's been my process. I feel very secure in that call and excited for that, and knowing that, boy, this was not a calling I had expected God to say to me. But when I started to listen to how he's calling me to sacrifice, it became very clear of what he was inviting me into. And so this past week, our governing board of elders and deacons affirmed the sending of me to open Jamestown Harbor Church sometime this fall, and that soon I'll begin the work of gathering a launch team and spending the summer doing work around creating this new thing, this new community of people that we hope will help people find their way back to God. So that's my personal journey on that, and I think that's important for you to know as we unpack our corporate journey on that. And so as we come back to that corporate response, God, with all of that going on, our leadership has discerned there's probably no single answer to this. That God is, in fact, inviting each single person here in this room, each single person who calls this place home, to walk through a journey. That God is really asking each of us to figure out, God, where are you inviting me into? For some of us, that might be into Harbor Life in Granville. For some of us, that might be God's doing something in that community with Tanner Smith, and I want to be part of that. And God's asking me to step into that. For others, God might be saying, hey, there's something going on next door down the hall, and you need to be part of that. For some of you, a lot of you, I hope, personally, God might be inviting you to help me plant a new church in Jamestown. Some of you may be called to things that I cannot even imagine right now. And so I believe God is inviting each and every one of us to lean into that calling and to say, God, there's a promise out there for each of us. What is it? What is it that you're calling us to? Where is the Canaan, the promised land that he's asking you to step into? But if you want to get to Canaan, we can't stop in Haran. So the other thing that we've discerned as a leadership team is that God is inviting us to take a big step of trust and to hold our final service as a Rock Harbor community on May 31. And that God is inviting us to take that leap, to say that, God, there's something beyond the pain of closing something we love. And to say, God, where are you inviting me into that? It's obviously a hard decision. This is a place I love. This is a place many of you love. We spent 5 years working in this place, and I don't think that God was doing nothing in that time. I think God has been preparing this place for 5 years, preparing it to be sent, preparing it to go. I believe that God has a promise for what has happened in this place, but to get there means we got to go through something. We got to go through something hard. So I want to encourage you to step into that process. I want to encourage you to step into that calling, to wrestle with and fight with the question of, God, what are you inviting us into? I have no idea what you expected walking in the room today. For many of us, I'm sure it wasn't this. And I know that. And I know that feels hard and challenging and confusing and strange. So I just want to talk for a minute about different ways we can respond to this, different ways we can react. And I want to talk about 4 ways, 4 reactions that we will probably each have at some point. Many of you might go to first before others. And the first one is to respond out of fear and anger. Our anxiety goes up when things change significantly in our lives, right? We are reminded in those times that we are not in control of something and we do not like it. And so it's going to be natural, it's going to be normal to want to react out of those spaces. And I would say it's okay to feel that. It's okay to walk through those emotions, but it's not okay to respond and act out of that. If we do, if we are a person who stays in that spot, we will miss something. We will miss what God is inviting us into. Some of you may just want to walk out of the door today. But what if we don't? What if we stay? What if we engage one other person in a conversation and say, let's talk about how I feel about this thing? So that's one reaction we can have. The other reaction is the one I go to more than anything else, and it's problem solving. Right? Okay, well, let's look at all the problems and figure out how we can fix them. What if we just didn't do that? What if we just kept staying here? What if we just met monthly? What if we did go to Travis and Jen's apartment, right? What if we do these things? What if we hang on until I feel comfortable? And then we walk into that. And that's normal too. It's a way of bargaining to say, God, you might be asking this, but here's the part I feel comfortable with, so let's just start there. But unfortunately, I feel like that only keeps us from actually stepping into what's next. That it keeps us from moving into where God is calling. And if God is calling, we better listen. And we better be about the process of stepping into that. Others will try to problem solve in a different way. Others will actually try to problem solve this, the exact wrong question. Right? They're going to start to say, well, the problem I'm trying to solve is where am I going to go to church next? Right? This is the problem I'm going to solve. And that's not what I think God's asking us to do. I don't think the work before you with this new information is to figure out where you're going to go to church on June 7th. I don't think that's what God's calling you into. I think God is inviting you into a different question. And that question is to say, God, what are you saying to me? What are you inviting me into? If we just problem solve, we miss that opportunity. When you answer the question of what's God inviting me into, all the other questions start to get figured out. So we can be angry, we can be afraid, we can be anxious, or we can problem solve. Another reaction that we can have is simply to withdraw or to become indifferent, right? To move back away from what's happening. Some of you will be tempted to do that. Some of you will be tempted to say, well, this is the last day I'm going to be here, right? I guess I'm going to move on and I'm going to make this a logistical change in my life. And I'm going to make a decision based on logistics of what's making sense in my world. But we are not making a logistical decision. We aren't. We could have. We could have said, well, let's just move Rock Harbor. We could have said, let's just organizationally merge with another church. We could have said, well, Scott's doing this, so therefore this, and those are a lot of logistical opportunities, things we could have done, but we didn't. We didn't make a logistical decision. We made a spiritual decision. We made a decision to believe that God is calling us to do what he's been calling people to do for thousands of years, and it's to give up everything and follow him, because we believe that there's a promise beyond that. So I would encourage you to be careful about backing away, to withdraw and become indifferent. I would encourage you not to do that. I would encourage you instead to lean in, That's the other way we can respond to this, is we can actually lean in to something that doesn't feel like I want to lean into it. If you use any of these other three reactions and just stay in that place, you will be missing out on what God is calling you to. Believe it or not, this is an incredible spiritual opportunity if you lean into it. But to do that, you're going to need to be patient. You're going to need to trust. You're going to need to listen. And you will not want to do that. You will not want to. But that's the hard work of leaning in. We've talked about this in some of our leadership circles. But between now and May 31, we're going to lean in on Sunday mornings. We're going to lean in here. This is our sermon series. This is our work, our spiritual work, is to meet in this place, hear what God's saying, and unpack this journey that he's calling us into. And it would be really easy for you to not come, to not be a part of that. And I want to ask you to lean in. Because I think if you do that, you're going to hear what God's inviting you into. Because at the end of the day, I'm not asking you to come to Jamestown and plant a church with me. I'm not asking you to go to Harbor Life. I'm asking you to respond to what God is inviting you into. And I can't make that answer for you. I'm asking you to lean in to God and follow where he's calling you. And that's going to be really hard. And I know that. It's been really hard. For those of us in this conversation at higher levels, this has been really hard. Believe it or not, I preached this sermon 2 years ago in June of 2013. Not the Rock Harbor's last service part. That's new, right? But this story of Abraham and Terah and his father and his God's calling, I preached it two years ago. And I ended this sermon with words that I want to end with today. Because I think God was saying it to us then, and I think he's saying it to us now. But I love this place. I love this church. I love you. But God's calling it to something more. He's calling you to something more. He's calling you to something that means it will be really risky to step out and step into. He's calling you to something that will take all of you, not just the part you want to bargain with. And that's going to hurt. It's going to take every single aspect of your life fully devoted to Jesus Christ, to lean in and say, God, where are you leading me? It is impossible to give part of yourself to Jesus. It's impossible to stop short in Haran and still end up in Canaan. For generations, Abraham took his kids back to that place, and he said, don't stop short. This is what happens when you stop short and you don't give everything to him. And I don't want you to tell that story. I don't want you to tell the story of where we stop short. Because there's something so much more. There's some promise out there that God's calling you into. And there certainly is pain, but out of that pain comes a promise. And I want to ask you just to trust God enough to step into that, to walk into that. It's a place that's uncertain and bigger than you can handle and understand and deal with. And I want you to lean in to the desert, to the chaos, to the unknown. We were having this conversation as a leadership core a couple weeks ago. And Stacy, I didn't ask you to tell the story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. Stacy told this story as we were talking about what it means to walk through the desert. And she said, I don't want to do that. And I don't disagree with her on that. I don't want to do that either. She said, I don't want to do that. That hurts, and that stinks. But she talked about the last time I was in a desert, and I was trying to figure out where God was leading me. I ended up here. And I remember the day we sat in that back row. It was my first day as pastor here. And my wife and I met someone who we now know and love. And being part of this place has changed her family, it's drawn her closer to God, and drew her into that living room 2 weeks ago. And so she said, I don't want to go through this desert. But I know that the last time I went through a desert, 4 years later, I ended up in this living room. And so I'm willing to go through it again because there might be another living room that I get to end up in. And I think that's true for all of us. I think that we don't want to go through a desert. We won't want to deal with the reality of something that hurts. But there's a living room on the other side. There's a church on the other side. There's a people. There's a friend. There's someone in your life who you do not love now, but that you will love later. And I fear if we don't do the work of moving, if we don't do the work of moving beyond Heron, we're going to miss that. So I want to bring the band up as we close in a song, and I just want to encourage us as they're coming up to really consider the question in front of us. They're gonna play a Rock Harbor classic, a song we love to sing in this place, and a song I think that speaks to this journey. And as we do that, I just want to ask these two questions. These two questions. This is our work in front of us. What is God inviting me into? And what is God saying to me in this? Resist the urge to try to figure out a logistical change in your life. Resist the urge to try to figure out, where am I going to go to church on June 7th? Resist the urge to lean away and pull back and to operate out of fear and anxiety. But lean in with these questions. Maybe as we sing, this is a time to process that. And as we do that, I just want to end with this verse out of Jeremiah to just frame us as we go forward. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord.
Why don't you guys stand and worship with us?
You called me out upon the waters, the great unknown, where feet may fail. And there I find you in the mystery, in oceans deep, my faith will stand. And I will call upon your name and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace. For I am yours and you are mine. Let's sing your grace. Your grace abounds in deepest waters. Your sovereign hand will be my guide. Where feet may fail and fear surround me, you never failed, and you won't start now. So I will call upon your name. Oh, keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace. For I am yours, and you are mine. presence of my Savior. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you would call me. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith would be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you will call me. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. And I will call upon your name, Jesus. Keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace. For I am yours, and you are mine.
So I know there's no good way to have that conversation today. There is no good way to have that conversation that feels great. But the way in which I hope we have this conversation is more about God than it is about us. And I know that raises a bunch of questions and lots of, man, what about this and what about that? And Darren's in the back. He's got some FAQ sheets that might help you answer some of those things. But as we go forward, I want to encourage you to ask those questions, but also questions about God and what is he saying and where is he inviting. So as you go, I pray that you will go not in fear, but you will go in hope. That you'll go not in anxiety, but that you will go in peace. And that you will go in the grace and love of Jesus Christ to find out what God is inviting you into. Amen.